For Lab 11, we're doing some VM creation. However, before we get into that, we have to do a little bit of housekeeping. In Lab 4, we created 2 folders in our NFS share. So this week, we're going to go ahead and we're going to expand on them. In our NFS share, which should be on C drive, we created a ISO and utilities folder. We copied certain utilities over, but we never copied any ISOs. So now we're going to have to do that. We're going to be copying over our Windows 7 Enterprise ISO, and we're going to be copying over a volume license Windows XP. And once they are created, we're going to go ahead and log into our vSphere client. You can do it either through the web client or the desk client, doesn't really matter. But once we're there, I'm at our VMs and templates. We have to make a few folders under this area, so it's just easier to do it under VM and templates. I'm going to be creating 2 additional folders, one folder called Labs, and one folder called Servers. Notice the color. If we do not do it here, if we do it somewhere else, they will not be blue. Once we've created both of them, we're going to go back to our home, and we're going to be looking at our hosts and cluster view. That way we can see our 2 VMs. We are going to be creating a VM on our ESXi1 host. If you right click on it, you can click on New Virtual Machine. You can also do it through the Virtual Machine button here. You can also do it from Create Virtual Machine there. You can also do it from the top menu as well. It doesn't really matter how you do it as long as we are doing a new virtual machine. Our first one is going to be, what do we want to do? Do we want to do a typical VM? Do we want to do a VM with additional devices and specific configurations? For us, a typical will be just fine. Name our virtual machine. We're going to call it E732C. It's an enterprise of Windows 7 and it's 32-bit. We're going to be installing this in our labs folder. Next, where do we actually want it stored? We want it stored in iSCSI1. It's going to be Windows 7 32-bit. We're going to leave it attached to the VM network. We're only going to give it 16 gigs, and we're going to go ahead and thin provision it. We could do eager zeroed or our lazy zeroed, but you notice both of those are thick provisions, and we don't want to dedicate all that space. So we're going to leave it all thin provisioned. And we should be ready to go. However, we want to do one more thing. We're going to go ahead and edit our virtual machine settings. The one specific thing that I want to make sure that we do is we're going to host or mount all our ISOs. So data store ISOs, we stored them under NFS. ISOs, first one is going to be our Windows 7. That way it's mounted, but we have to tell it to turn on. If that's not checked, even though we mounted it, nothing will happen. And that should be the last setting. Normally you want to double check the memory, double check the video setting, enable 3D support, One last thing just to help us is you'll notice that we have a floppy drive. Let's go ahead and remove it. And that should be sufficient enough. Click Finish. And you'll see that it's powering on. We're going to go ahead and launch our virtual console so that we can see it. That will give us display. And we're going to go ahead and power it on to go through the Windows installation. Because it is a installation of an operating system nested, I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. You don't need to see the step-by-step Windows installation. Make sure that you're naming it correctly, and you should be fine. An interesting point here is, depending on our hard drives, it may take a while to install, so do keep that in mind. So for the naming it, make sure you use your name. I'm just going to go ahead and put student, and we're going to go ahead and finish our installation. I'm not worrying about a password or anything. We're going to do ask me later just because we are limited in space, and normally we would be doing all the updates. It's just, again, because of space and time, we're not going to be doing updates. Verify your time and everything is correct. And then we're going to be choosing a work network. That is our base installation of Windows 7. You do want to make sure that VMware Tools does install. And make sure Windows Updates is not installed. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to power it down, and we're going to redo the same thing with Windows XP. Okay, so it took a little while for it actually to fully load, but you notice that you're going to have weird mouse control, and VMware Tools is not installed. That's one thing we have to make sure which is installed. So to do that, we have to get out of our VM, but you'll notice it's kind of difficult. The mouse will jump. Alt and Control will unlock it, and we'll separate our two mice. We're going up to VM, Guest, and that will be the Install Upgrade to VMware Tools. Yes, we do want to mount it, and we do want to make sure it's installed. It will improve video performance and mouse control. That's a big thing. It takes a second, but once it mounts, you should be able to click back in your VM. It sometimes auto-loads, not always. So let's go ahead and go to Computer, and we should see it. And we're just going to go ahead and do a basic installation of it. Double-click on it, should pop up with a UAC, and go through the on-screen prompts. Install it completely, and you are good to go. Keep in mind that we are doing a nested virtual environment, so you may see that the VMs are kind of slow. They're not incredibly slow, but they're not the snappiest either. I'm going to close out of everything, so just my VMware Tools is up. And again, go ahead and do a complete. And that is all. Once that is done, I will power it down, and I will install XP. Part C of our lab, which is installing XP from an OVF or OVA. Our OVAs/OVFs are pretty sensitive, and they have a habit of corrupting. So if you're in the classroom and you have the OVFs copied over, and it keeps failing, redo it as a ISO. Same way we did Windows 7, except we'll be doing it with Windows XP. With XP, you'll use the appropriate serial code, and again, you're installing it with the same settings you installed Windows 7 with. And just so that, it finished faster than I thought. We're not going to manually restart it, I'm just going to power it down, and I will install my XP. So while that's shutting down, I'm going to start my second machine. Again, typical is fine. We're putting that in our labs folder. We're storing it in Esxi 1. We're installing Windows XP 32-bit. We're going to leave that with our E1000. We're going to thin provision it. 16 gigs. We're going to edit it, just like we did before. We're going to mount the ISO for XP. This is a volume license for XP Pro. We're going to make sure it's going to power on. We are also going to remove our floppy. And notice with XP, you don't have the option for 3D graphics. That's okay. And that should be beyond sufficient for us. Notice I did not name it correctly, so I'm going to go ahead and rename it. Actually, I'm just going to delete it. I want to delete it from disk. I will just recreate it. New virtual machine, typical, labs folder. I'm going to be calling this XP Pro C. Make sure it's in the lab folder. Again, Esxi 1. We're doing Windows XP 32-bit. E1 for our adapter. Thin provisioning, 16 gigs. Edit our virtual machine settings. Mount the correct ISO. Again, XP Professional. Make sure it's powering on. Delete your floppy. And we are good to go. It's named correctly. We'll expand it. Turn it on. XP Pro in our virtual environment in the lab room took over an hour to install. So I'm going to install it again here. I'm going to pause it. And we're doing a very default installation. Just follow the on-screen prompts. Make sure to use this product key that was given to you. And don't worry about the updates. On SSDs, it still took about 40 minutes. And heavy hard drive access. Again, I'm not doing anything with updates. And if you're prompted to make a user, just make it your name. The mouse controls will be very funky until we get our Vmware tools installed, so do bear that in mind. And it should be populating here in a second. I've noticed XP does not always run the smoothest within a virtual machine, even though by far it takes the least amount of resources. That's always been an interesting point.